The day Lorenzo Moretti saw the ghost, he had already killed 2 men before breakfast. The bodies were in the sub-basement now, wrapped in plastic, waiting for the incinerator crew. Routine, clinical. He'd washed the blood from his hands with the same detached precision he used for everything. 3 pumps of soap, water scalding enough to hurt, nails scraped clean with the silver brush his father had given him the night he made his first kill. "You're a Moretti now," the old man had said. "The boy you were is dead." Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe. New stories unfold here every day, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. And don't forget to comment which state you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in. Enzo stood at the 3rd-floor window of his private study, a crystal tumbler of whiskey untouched in his scarred hand, and watched the service entrance of the estate. Monday morning, new staff rotation. The head housekeeper was lining them up like soldiers, maids in black uniforms, groundskeepers in gray, all of them too terrified to look up at the windows where the monster lived. He didn't blame them. The morning sun cut through Chicago's industrial haze, painting the courtyard in shades of rust and gold. Enzo's reflection stared back at him in the bulletproof glass. A stranger's face, really. The ink crawling up his neck told stories in symbols, a fallen angel on his jaw, a rosary of thorns behind his ear, the number 18 etched into his temple. 18. The year everything changed. The year he stopped being human. The face tattoos had been his idea, a test, after his first year as a maid man. If she ever saw him again, would she recognize the boy who used to sketch her name in the frost on the group home windows? Or would she see the monster everyone else did? It didn't matter anymore. Nia Jefferson was a memory from another lifetime, a girl with box braids and paint-stained fingers who used to sneak him crackers from the kitchen when the older kids stole his dinner. A girl who held his hand during thunderstorms and promised him that someday someone would choose them. Choose him. Then the Morettis came, and he'd left her standing in the rain outside St. Augustine's with nothing but a promise carved into a park bench 6 blocks away. "I'll come back for you." That was 10 years ago. Enzo drained the whiskey in one burning swallow and turned from the window. The estate didn't run itself, and the Volkov shipment was late, which meant someone's throat needed cutting by. A flash of crimson in his peripheral vision made him freeze. His head snapped back to the courtyard. There. 3rd from the end of the line, a woman in a red blouse, defiant against the sea of black uniforms, carrying a duffel bag that looked older than she was. Her hair was different now, natural and short, framing a face that had lost its roundness but none of its softness. She was thinner than he remembered, tired, the kind of tired that came from years of fighting and losing. But it was her. Nia. The glass in Enzo's hand shattered. He didn't feel the pain, didn't notice the blood welling in his palm as shards fell to the Persian rug. His entire world had narrowed to the woman stepping off the service bus, head down, shoulders tight with the defensive posture of someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. She was here. In his house, in his city. After a decade of private investigators and dead ends, after he'd scoured every database and called in every favor, after he'd convinced himself she'd disappeared into witness protection or worse, she'd walked straight into the lion's den wearing a red blouse like a dare. "Boss?" Enzo's underboss, Marco, stood in the doorway, gun already drawn at the sound of breaking glass. His eyes swept the room for threats, then landed on Enzo's bleeding hand. "You hurt? Get out. Your hand. Get out." The words came out in a growl that made Marco's trigger finger twitch, but the older man knew better than to push. He backed out slowly, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. Enzo wrapped his hand in his pocket square and moved back to the window, pulse hammering in his throat like he was 15 again, watching her dance in the rain without an umbrella. She was talking to Mrs. Chen now, the head housekeeper, nodding along to instructions. Professional. Careful. The Nia he knew used to laugh too loud and hug too hard and believe in people who didn't deserve it. This woman looked like she'd learned better. Good, a dark part of him thought. She'll need that here. The rest of him, the part that still remembered what hope felt like, wanted to run down there and pull her into his arms and tell her he never stopped looking, never stopped waiting, never stopped carving her name into every empty space his life had become. But Lorenzo Moretti didn't run, and the Don of Chicago didn't beg. So he stood at his window like a gargoyle, bleeding into expensive fabric, and watched the only woman he'd ever loved disappear into the servants' entrance of the fortress he'd built to keep the world out, the same fortress that had just become her cage. The smell hit Nia first. Not the smell of money, though there was plenty of that in the marble and gold leaf and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her entire life. No, it was the smell underneath. Gun oil, cigar smoke, something chemical and sharp that made her think of hospital corridors and crime scenes. This was a mistake. But mistakes were a luxury she couldn't afford, not with $47,000 in medical debt and an eviction notice burning a hole in her backpack. The agency had called it a domestic placement with a high net worth client, code for Mafia, probably, but they paid $4,000 a week under the table and didn't ask questions about gaps in her resume. Nia had stopped asking questions 3 bankruptcy filings ago. "You'll be assigned to the East Wing," Mrs. Chen was saying, her accent thick but her English precise. She was a small woman with silver hair, pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. "The Don's private quarters are in the North Tower. You do not go there. You do not look at the North Tower. You do not speak to anyone from the North Tower. Understood?" "Understood," Nia echoed, though her skin prickled with warning. The Dawn. Jesus, she really had fallen far. The service hallway was a warren of exposed brick and fluorescent lighting, the bones of the mansion that the pretty people never saw. Nia followed Mrs. Chen past industrial kitchens and laundry rooms, past thick doors with keypads and security cameras that tracked their movement with red blinking eyes. Just keep your head down. 1 year. Save enough to start over somewhere else. Anywhere else. "This is your uniform." Mrs. Chen thrust a bundle of black fabric at her. "You wear this and nothing else. No jewelry, no perfume, no red." Nia looked down at her blouse, the only one without stains, and felt her face heat. "I didn't know. Now you do." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Red attracts attention here. And attention—" She made a cutting gesture across her throat. "Great. Fantastic. Totally not ominous at all." Mrs. Chen led her up a servant's staircase, narrow and steep, designed to be invisible, and emerged into a hallway that could have been transplanted from a European palace. Silk wallpaper. Oil paintings in gilt frames, the kind of quiet that came from money so old it didn't need to announce itself. "East Wing guest suites," Mrs. Chen announced. "You'll clean 6 rooms, twice daily. Don't touch the desks. Don't open drawers. Don't—" A door at the end of the hall opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a car. He had the kind of face that made people cross the street. Broken nose, scar through his eyebrow, eyes like chipped ice. When he saw them, his hand moved instinctively to his hip, where Nia could see the outline of a gun. Mrs. Chen went rigid. "Mr. DeLuca, we were just—" "New girl?" His gaze raked over Nia with all the warmth of a prison searchlight. "Yes, sir. Starting today." He grunted and walked past them, but not before Nia caught the words he muttered into his phone. "Yeah, she's here. He's gonna lose his shit." "Who's gonna lose his—" "Come." Mrs. Chen grabbed Nia's elbow and pulled her forward, practically running now. "We have work." But Nia's feet had stopped working, because as they passed an open doorway, a study maybe or a library, she saw it. On the desk, under a paperweight shaped like a bullet. A sketch. Pencil on yellowed paper, the edges worn like it had been handled 1,000 times. A girl, maybe 12 years old, box braids, gap-toothed smile. Paint on her cheek. Nia Jefferson, age 12, St. Augustine's Group Home. She'd drawn that. A self-portrait for the art show they had every year, the one where rich people came to feel good about themselves by buying the traumatized kids' artwork. But she'd given that drawing to, no. Mrs. Chen, Nia heard herself say, voice hollow. Who lives in the North Tower? The old woman's face went white. No one you need to know, child. Now move. But Nia was already moving. Backward, away from the sketch, away from the impossible implications, when she heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming from the direction of the staircase that absolutely, definitely led to the North Tower. And then a voice. Low. Rough. Carrying the weight of years and violence and something that sounded almost like grief. Hello, Nia? She turned, and came face to face with a ghost. The other maids didn't talk to her for the first 3 days. Nia told herself it was normal. New girl, hierarchy, all the petty politics that came with working in a house where the wrong word could get you disappeared. But there was something else in their avoidance, something that felt less like hazing and more like quarantine. They'd go silent when she entered the break room, exchange glances heavy with meaning she couldn't decode, then scatter like startled birds. On the 4th morning, a girl named Sophia finally broke ranks. She was young, maybe 19, with nervous hands that never stopped moving. She cornered Nia in the linen closet and whispered, He's watching you. Nia's blood went cold. Who? Him? Sophia's eyes darted to the ceiling, as if God himself was listening. The Don. He never comes down from the tower, never asks about staff, but he's been asking about you, where you're from, how long you're staying. Her voice dropped even lower. They say he hasn't left his study in 4 days, just sits there, staring at something on his desk. The sketch. It had to be. That impossible, devastating sketch that meant someone in this house of monsters knew exactly who she was, had known before she even walked through the door. What does he want with me? Nia managed. Sophia shook her head, backing toward the door. I don't know, but girls who catch his attention don't last long here. Either they leave, or… She didn't finish. She didn't have to. After that, Nia moved through the mansion like a woman crossing a minefield. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, her presence as invisible as the old Nia used to be in the group home. The one who learned early that being seen meant being hurt. The East Wing became her entire universe, 6 guest suites that smelled of lemon polish and emptiness. Hallways long enough to echo her footsteps back at her like accusations. But she never saw him, the monster, the Don, Lorenzo Moretti, a name she'd heard whispered with the kind of reverence people usually reserved for natural disasters. The staff spoke about him in fragments, in warnings. Don't make eye contact if you pass him in the halls. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ever go to the North Tower. Nia didn't plan to. She had 8 months left before she'd saved enough to disappear, maybe to Portland or Denver, or anywhere that didn't smell like gun oil and expensive cologne layered over something rotten. Then Mrs. Chen changed her assignment. The Don's study, the old woman said on Friday morning, her face carefully blank. It needs cleaning. Nia's stomach dropped. I thought no one was allowed in the North Tower. The Don requested you specifically. Mrs. Chen pressed a key card into Nia's palm, her grip tight enough to hurt. Go, clean. Don't touch anything you don't have to. And for the love of God, child, don't look at him if he's there. The North Tower was a different world. Where the East Wing was opulent but cold, this space felt lived in. Dangerous and intimate in equal measure. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture worn soft with use. The air thick with cigar smoke and something underneath it. Something that made Nia think of the boy who used to smell like rain and stolen soap. The study door was ajar. She pushed it open with her cleaning cart, heart hammering so loud she was sure the entire house could hear it. The room was empty, thank God, but it carried the weight of recent occupation. A crystal tumbler on the desk, still wet. An ashtray with a half-smoked cigar, papers spread across the surface like he'd left in a hurry. And there, in the center of it all, under a paperweight shaped like a bullet, the sketch. Her face. Nia's hands shook as she moved closer. She shouldn't touch it, shouldn't even look. But she couldn't stop herself from reaching out, fingertips barely grazing the yellowed paper. "I've been waiting for you to come to me." The voice came from behind her, from the shadows near the bookshelf, and Nia spun so fast her cart toppled over, sending bottles of cleaner skittering across the hardwood. He stepped into the light, and Nia's world fractured. Because underneath the face tattoos and the scars and the suit that probably cost more than her life, underneath the monster everyone feared, she saw him. Enzo. The cleaning supplies pooled around her feet, ammonia and lemon oil mixing into something acidic that burned her throat. Or maybe that was just panic. Nia couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who used to be a boy, who held her hand during thunderstorms. "Enzo," she whispered, and the name felt like broken glass in her mouth. Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or hunger, but it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. He moved closer, each step deliberate, controlled, like he was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. The ink on his skin seemed to writhe in the lamplight, angels and demons, prayers and violence, all of it telling a story she didn't know how to read. "You shouldn't be here, Nia." His voice was rougher than she remembered, scraped raw by years of shouting orders and breaking bones. But underneath it, buried deep, she heard the ghost of the boy who used to read her poetry from stolen library books. "This house isn't safe for you." "Then why did you bring me here?" The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with a decade of abandonment. "That sketch. You knew. You knew I'd applied, knew I was coming, and you let me walk into this." She gestured at the study, at him, at the gun she could now see holstered under his jacket. Enzo's jaw tightened. "I didn't bring you here. I would never." He stopped, dragged a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. "Christ, Nia. Do you think I wanted you anywhere near this life? I've spent 10 years making sure you stayed away from me." "Then fire me." She lifted her chin even as her legs trembled. "Let me go." "I can't." The words came out like a confession, like something torn from his chest. He was close enough now that she could smell him. Expensive cologne over something darker, cigarettes and whiskey and cordite. "The second you walked through those gates, everyone in this house knew. Every enemy I have, every rival family, every bastard looking for leverage, they all know now that Lorenzo Moretti has a weakness. I'm not your weakness. I'm nothing to you." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Could see it in the way his hands were clenched at his sides, like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You're everything," he said quietly, and the rawness in his voice made her chest ache. "You always were, that's the problem." Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful. Enzo's posture shifted instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold authority. Marco appeared in the doorway, took in the scene with sharp eyes, then cleared his throat. "Boss, the Volkov meeting." "Cancel it." Marco blinked. "We can't cancel then reschedule it." Enzo didn't look away from Nia. "And send Mrs. Chen up here, now." When they were alone again, Enzo moved to his desk, putting distance between them like proximity was a physical threat. He picked up the sketch, stared at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it in a drawer, locking away the evidence of who he used to be. "You're being reassigned," he said. His voice pure business now, the Don talking, not the boy. "You'll work exclusively in the North Tower. My personal quarters, my study, nowhere else. You'll have your own room on the 3rd floor. Guards will escort you everywhere." "You're making me a prisoner." "I'm keeping you alive." He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes stole the breath from her lungs. "There are 23 families in this city who would kill you just to watch me bleed. I won't let that happen. I won't." His voice cracked, just barely. "I already left you once, Nia. I'm not doing it again, not even to save you from me." Mrs. Chen appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. Enzo didn't acknowledge her, didn't break eye contact with Nia. Reassign her duties, North Tower only, personal staff, anyone who questions it answers to me. He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a threat that could level buildings. And if anyone, disrespects her, I'll personally remove their tongue. Spread the word. The third floor of the North Tower had been designed for a queen, or maybe a very expensive prisoner. Nia couldn't decide which. Her new room had silk sheets and a bathroom with heated floors, a balcony that overlooked the gardens, and iron bars hidden behind velvet curtains. The door locked from the outside. She'd been there for 6 days when she heard the screaming. It came from somewhere below, raw and animal, the sound of a man begging for mercy he wouldn't receive. Nia pressed her hands over her ears and tried to remember that she'd known what this was, what he was. The rumors hadn't been exaggerations. The monster was real. He just happened to have eyes that still looked at her like she was something holy. The screaming stopped abruptly. An hour later, Enzo knocked on her door. Not entered. Knocked. Like she had a choice about whether to let him in. She opened it to find him in shirt sleeves, tie loosened, blood spattered across his collar. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from carrying violence like a second skin. Behind him, 2 guards stood at attention, trying very hard not to exist. "You need anything?" he asked, and his voice was so carefully gentle it made her throat tight. "I heard." She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "I know." He glanced down at his shirt, seemed to register the blood for the first time. "He tried to steal from me, from my family. There are rules. And the rules say you have to—" She couldn't say the words. "The rules say I survive." He met her eyes, unflinching. "Or everyone I'm responsible for dies, including you." Before she could respond, footsteps thundered up the stairs. Marco appeared, followed by 2 men half carrying a third between them. The injured man was young, maybe 25, with a bullet wound in his shoulder that was bleeding through an improvised tourniquet. His face was gray with blood loss. "Boss, he needs—" Marco stopped when he saw Nia. "Shit. Sorry. We'll take him to the basement." "No." Enzo was already moving, clearing papers off the table in the sitting room attached to Nia's quarters. "Bring him here. Nia, go to your room." But she didn't move. Couldn't. Because the wounded man was looking at her with desperate, pleading eyes. And she'd seen that look before. In foster kids who'd been hurt, in her mother before the overdose, in every broken thing that had ever crossed her path. "I can help," she heard herself say. Enzo turned to her slowly. "No. I was pre-med for 2 years before I dropped out. I know how to clean a wound, how to—" "No." The command in his voice made the guards flinch, but then he looked at the bleeding man, at the clock, at some calculation only he could make. His jaw worked. "Fine. But you don't look at their faces. You don't learn their names. And when this is over, you forget it happened." She nodded, already moving toward the bathroom for clean towels. The bullet had gone through cleanly. Lucky. Nia worked with steady hands while Enzo watched from the doorway, nursing a whiskey, his presence both protective and predatory. The other men left once the bleeding stopped, taking their half-conscious cargo with them. Promises to send a real doctor. Gratitude in Marco's eyes that looked almost like respect. Then it was just the 2 of them in the sitting room that smelled of copper and antiseptic. Nia's hands were shaking now, adrenaline crashing. Enzo was beside her instantly, pulling her to the couch, pressing the whiskey glass into her palms. "Drink." She did. It burned, but it helped. They sat in silence while the sun set beyond the barred balcony, painting them both in shades of rust and gold, the same colors as the day they'd said goodbye outside St. Augustine's. Nia studied his profile. The hard line of his jaw, the ink that covered his neck like armor, the scar that cut through his left cheek from ear to mouth. Without thinking, She reached out and traced it with her fingertip. Enzo went rigid, every muscle locked, but he didn't pull away. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. His eyes closed. For a moment, he looked less like a monster and more like a man who'd been hurt too many times to remember how to heal. "My father, the night I became a made man. He said it would remind me that mercy is weakness." He opened his eyes, caught her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles with devastating gentleness. He was wrong. Mercy is you, Naya, and you're the only thing in this world that's ever made me strong. The dinner was supposed to be neutral ground, a quarterly meeting of the 5 families where grievances were aired and territories negotiated over 30-year-old Scotch and Wagyu beef. Enzo had tried to keep Nia upstairs, had ordered Mrs. Chen to assign someone else to serve, but the old woman had looked at him with something like pity and said, "They already know, Don Moretti. Hiding her now makes you look weak." So Nia wore the black uniform and carried wine that cost more than her car used to, and tried not to feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes tracking her movement around the table. The dining room was obscene in its opulence, hand-painted ceiling, chandeliers dripping crystal, a table that could seat 20. Tonight there were 8 men, all of them dressed in suits that screamed power, all of them wearing violence like cologne. Enzo sat at the head, his face an expressionless mask, but Nia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested too casually near the steak knife. She'd learned to read him again over the past 2 weeks. Had learned that he drank his coffee black at dawn while reviewing kill reports, that he never slept more than 4 hours, that sometimes she'd catch him staring at her with an expression so raw it felt like witnessing something sacred and profane at once. The Calabrian shipment was light, a man with silver hair was saying, Vittorio De Luca, Enzo's underboss. 3 kilos short, someone's skimming. Then find who and make an example. This from a younger man with a scar bisecting his lip, Dante Russo, East Side Territory. His eyes had been following Nia since she entered the room, and not in a way that suggested professional interest. She refilled his wine glass with steady hands, keeping her gaze down like Mrs. Chen had taught her. "Invisible, your furniture, nothing." "Interesting choice of staff." "Moretti." The voice came from the far end of the table, Sal Volkov, the Russian transplant who'd been making noise about expanding into Enzo's ports. He was older, maybe 50, with cold blue eyes and a smile that made Nia's skin crawl. "Most of us use Filipinas. Cheaper, more obedient." He said it in English, making sure she understood every word. Enzo's knife stopped moving across his plate. The sound of silverware around the table died. "My staffing choices aren't your concern, Volkov." "No?" The Russian leaned back, swirling his wine. "Just curious about the sudden promotion. From East Wing nobody to personal attendant in the Don's private quarters. Must have special skills." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Nia felt her face heat, but she kept pouring, kept moving, kept being invisible even as fury scorched through her veins. "Watch your mouth." Enzo's voice could have cut glass. Volkov laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "Come now, we're all men here. You can't bring a pretty thing like that into the lion's den and expect us not to notice." He crooked a finger at Nia. "Come here, sweetheart. Let me see what's got our Don so distracted." "She's staff," Marco interjected quickly. "Show some respect." But Volkov was already reaching out as Nia passed his chair, his hand clamping around her wrist hard enough to bruise. "Just want a closer look at what—" The rest of his sentence ended in a scream. Enzo had moved so fast Nia didn't see it happen. One moment he was seated, the next he had Volkov's hand pinned to the table, bending his fingers back at an angle that made something crack. The Russian's wineglass shattered on the floor. Men were standing, reaching for weapons. Marco was shouting something, but Enzo's voice cut through it all like a blade. "You touch her again. I'll remove your arm at the shoulder." Another crack, another scream. Volkov's index finger bent completely backward. "Enzo, stop!" Nia tried, but he wasn't listening. His eyes had gone black, empty of everything except rage. "She's mine." Each word was punctuated by pressure, by the wet sound of ligaments tearing. Not staff, not a distraction, mine. And the next man who forgets that dies choking on his own teeth. The silence that followed was absolute. Vittorio was the first to sit back down, carefully, deliberately. A show of support. The others followed slowly, reading the room, calculating odds. Only Marco looked horrified. Because Marco understood what had just happened. The secret was out. Lorenzo Moretti, the monster of Chicago, had a weakness, and everyone at this table now knew exactly how to hurt him. Marco waited until the last car pulled away before he entered Enzo's study. The Don stood at the window, knuckles still bloody from where he'd beaten Volkov's hand into hamburger, staring out at nothing. The guards had tripled on the grounds. Nia could see them from her balcony, shadows with rifles moving through the gardens like ghosts. "You've just signed her death warrant." Marco's voice was flat, matter of fact. No judgment, just strategy. "Volkov will retaliate, so will Russo. And the commission. Christ, Enzo, the commission is going to demand a meeting." "Let them demand." Enzo didn't turn from the window. "They'll want her gone. Out of the house, out of the city, or—" Marco stopped, but they both knew how that sentence ended. "Or dead. That's the rule. No civilian entanglements. No weaknesses. You know this. The rules can go to hell. The rules are what keep you alive." Marco slammed his hand on the desk, a rare show of emotion from the usually stoic underboss. "You think those men at that table tonight are going to forget what they saw? You broke protocol, you showed vulnerability, and now every enemy we have knows exactly where to put the knife." Finally, Enzo turned. His face was terrible in its calmness, the eye of a hurricane. "Then I'll kill anyone who tries." "You can't kill everyone. Watch me." Upstairs, Nia heard the shouting through the floor. She sat on her bed, still in the black uniform, still smelling the copper-sweet scent of Volkov's blood on the air. Her wrist ached where he'd grabbed her, bruises already blooming purple against her brown skin. But that wasn't what made her hands shake. It was the look on Enzo's face when he'd hurt that man. Not rage. She could have understood rage. No. It was satisfaction. Pure, cold satisfaction, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to unleash the violence he kept leashed inside him. "She's mine." The words echoed in her skull. Not "she works for me." Not "she's under my protection." Mine. Like she was property, another territory to defend, another piece on his chessboard of blood and power. The door opened without a knock. Enzo entered, followed by two men in tactical gear carrying equipment she recognized from crime shows, motion sensors, cameras, some kind of scanning device. "What is this?" Nia stood, anger finally overriding fear. "Additional security." Enzo's voice was emotionless, the Don fully in control now. "They're wiring your room, the hallways, the stairs. 4 guards will be posted outside your door at all times. You'll have an escort to the bathroom, to meals, everywhere." The men moved past her, started mounting cameras in the corners, invading the one space that had almost felt like hers. "Get out." She said it quietly, but something in her tone made the security team pause, look to Enzo for permission. He nodded, and they left, closing the door behind them. "Nia, I didn't ask for your protection." She was shaking now, 10 years of swallowed anger finally breaking free. "I asked for a job. I asked for a chance to pay off my debts and disappear and maybe, have a life that didn't involve guns and blood and men who think they can grab me because I'm just some disposable—" Her voice cracked. "You're not disposable." He moved toward her, but she stepped back. "Then what am I? Your maid? Your prisoner? Your what, Enzo?" "Mine." The word came out raw, stripped of all the authority he'd wielded downstairs. Just a man, confessing. "I waited 10 years, Nia. 10 years of searching, of hoping you were safe somewhere, happy somewhere, anywhere, but here. And then you walked through my gates wearing that damn red blouse and I—" He stopped, dragged both hands through his hair. "I can't lose you. Not to a bullet, not to fear, not to the life I've built." I won't. That's not your choice to make. Like hell it isn't. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupped her face with hands that had broken bones an hour ago, but now touched her like she was made of glass. You think I don't know what I've done? What I've made you? I turned you into a target the second I looked at you, like you mattered. But you do, Nia. You do. You're the only thing in this godforsaken world that still makes me feel human. His forehead pressed against hers, and she could feel him trembling. So hate me if you want. Fight me. But I'm not letting you go. The guards changed shifts at 3 in the morning. Nia had been watching their patterns for 5 days, memorizing rotations from her barred balcony while pretending to sleep. She wasn't supposed to hear the conversation in the hallway, wasn't supposed to be awake when Vittorio and Marco spoke in hushed Italian outside her door. Thinking the walls were thick enough to hide their conspiracy, but the walls were old, and Nia had learned Italian from a foster mother in another lifetime. The commission meets in 6 days, Vittorio was saying. They're calling for a vote. Either he removes the girl, or they remove him. Enzo won't. Enzo's not thinking clearly. He's compromised, and Volkov's already making moves, reaching out to the Calabrians, the Russos. They're forming an alliance. A pause. They're going to hit us during the exchange on Friday, while he's distracted playing house with the maid. Then we warn him. He won't listen. He'll just lock her up tighter, post more guards, and walk right into the ambush anyway because he can't see past her. Vittorio's voice dropped to something like grief. I've known him since he was 18, Marco. Watched him become the man his father wanted. He survived 3 wars and a dozen assassination attempts because he was smart, ruthless, focused. But this girl, she's going to get him killed. Nia pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. So what do we do? Marco asked. We pray she runs, because if she doesn't, we're all dead by Sunday. Their footsteps faded down the hall. Nia sat in the dark for a long time, listening to her heartbeat, thinking about the boy who used to hold her hand and promise her forever. The boy who'd become a monster to survive, the man who looked at her like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in the same skin. I love you enough to let you live. She wrote the letter on expensive stationery stolen from Enzo's desk, her handwriting shaky but determined. She didn't explain, couldn't, because if she tried to put words to the ache in her chest, she'd never leave. Instead, she wrote the one thing that mattered. You taught me that love means protecting the people we can't bear to lose, even from ourselves, especially from ourselves. I'm sorry I'm not brave enough to stay and watch you die for me. And she left it on her pillow, weighted down with the sketch he'd kept for 10 years. The sympathetic driver was the youngest guard, a kid named Tommy, who still had hope in his eyes and a girlfriend he talked about constantly. Nia found him on his smoke break, offered him every penny she'd saved, and lied through her teeth about a sick sister in Milwaukee. He drove her to the bus station in his personal car, windows dark, cap pulled low. Don Moretti finds out I did this, I'm dead, he said, hands tight on the wheel. Then make sure he doesn't find out. Nia's voice was steadier than she felt. He led her out 3 blocks from the Greyhound depot. Dawn was breaking over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold, the same colors as the day Enzo had left her. Poetic, maybe, or just cruel. She was halfway to the ticket counter when she heard the sound. Sirens. No, not sirens. Car alarms, dozens of them, all going off at once in the direction of the estate, and underneath it, something that sounded like thunder, but wasn't. Gunfire. Enzo found the room empty at 3:47 a.m. He'd been in a meeting with his weapons supplier, his mind half on ammunition counts and half on the woman sleeping upstairs. Except she wasn't sleeping, wasn't upstairs, wasn't anywhere. The letter sat on her pillow like an obituary. He read it once, twice. Then his hands started shaking so violently the paper tore. Marco appeared in the doorway, took one look at Enzo's face, and went pale. Boss! Find her! Enzo's voice was barely human, something dragged up from a place where reason didn't exist. He was already moving, grabbing weapons from the hidden safe, strapping on holsters with mechanical precision. Shut down every road out of the city, ground flights, check buses, trains, private cars. I want every camera feed, every traffic light, every… Enzo, the Volkov situation. I don't care. He turned, and Marco actually stepped back from what he saw in his Don's eyes. You tell Volkov, you tell the commission, you tell God himself, I'm coming. And if she's hurt, if she's scared, if she's alone, because of the world I built, I will burn this entire city to the ground and salt the fucking earth. He chambered around, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Find her, or I burn it anyway. The Greyhound station hadn't changed in 10 years. Same flickering fluorescent lights, same smell of stale coffee and diesel fumes, same wooden benches scarred with initials of people who'd passed through on their way to somewhere better. Nia sat near the back exit, ticket to Denver clutched in her hand, trying not to think about the boy who'd kissed her forehead on this exact spot and promised to come back. He never did come back. She'd waited for 3 months, sneaking out of the group home every weekend to sit on these benches, until Mrs. Patterson found her and explained gently that sometimes people made promises they couldn't keep. I'm doing the same thing now, Nia thought, staring at the letter she'd written, the words already haunting her. Breaking a promise to save him from himself. The bus wasn't due for another 20 minutes. She should feel relieved. She'd made it out. Escaped the golden cage and the man who loved her like a loaded gun. Instead, she felt hollow, scraped clean of everything except the ache of leaving. The station was nearly empty. A homeless man sleeping in the corner, a young mother with 2 kids, an older woman reading a paperback, and 3 men in dark coats who'd entered 5 minutes ago and hadn't bought tickets. Nia's instincts, honed by years of foster care in bad neighborhoods, started screaming. She stood slowly, casually, angling toward the exit. One of the men noticed, made eye contact, smiled in a way that turned her blood to ice. Then all 3 were moving. Nia ran. Out the back exit, into the alley that smelled of piss and rotting garbage, her feet pounding pavement as shouts erupted behind her. She could hear them gaining, could hear the distinctive sound of a suppressor being screwed onto a barrel. A black SUV screamed around the corner, tires shrieking. The passenger door flew open and Enzo was there, half hanging out of the moving vehicle, gun already drawn. Get down! Nia hit the ground. The world exploded into noise. Gunfire strobed the alley in muzzle flashes. Enzo was out of the SUV now, using the door as cover, returning fire with terrifying precision. One hitman dropped, then another. The third dove behind a dumpster, and Enzo was already moving, flanking. Predator smooth, despite the blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. More men poured out of a van at the alley's mouth. Volkov's crew, she recognized one from the dinner. This wasn't a hit. This was an execution. Marco emerged from the driver's side, laying down covering fire. Boss, we're outnumbered. Get her out. But Enzo wasn't retreating. He was advancing, each shot dropping a target, his face a mask of cold fury that had nothing to do with self-preservation and everything to do with the woman on the ground behind him. A bullet caught him in the side. He barely flinched, just pivoted, and put 2 rounds through the shooter's forehead. Enzo! Nia screamed his name without thinking, scrambling toward him as another shooter appeared on the fire escape above. She saw the rifle, saw the angle, saw the shot that would take him in the back. She threw herself at him. They hit the ground together, his body twisting to take the impact, and suddenly she was underneath him, his weight pressing her into the filthy alley concrete. Bullets sparked off the pavement where his head had been a second before. He returned fire one-handed, the other arm locked around her like a vice, keeping her covered as Marco flanked the sniper. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. It felt like hours. When the last body dropped, the silence was deafening. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the cops, which meant they had minutes before this scene became a jurisdictional nightmare. Marco was already pulling the SUV closer, shouting something about extraction. But Enzo wasn't moving. He pushed himself up on his elbows, still caging Nia beneath him, blood dripping from his shoulder onto her shirt. His eyes, God, his eyes were wild, dark, absolutely feral. "You are my life," he said, each word bitten off. "My beginning and my end, the only good thing I've ever had." His hand cupped her face, smearing blood across her cheek. "Don't you ever, ever try to save me again. You want to save someone. Save yourself, run from me, hate me. But don't you dare sacrifice yourself for a monster who isn't worth your mercy." "You're worth everything," Nia whispered, and kissed him. He tasted like gunpowder and desperation. The commission met in the basement of a restaurant that had been neutral ground for 40 years. 12 men representing every major family in Chicago sat around a table that had seen more blood spilled in handshakes than most morgues saw in a year. They'd called the meeting to strip Lorenzo Moretti of his title, his territory, and, if Volkov had his way, his life. Enzo walked in alone. No guards, no weapons visible. Just a man in a perfectly tailored suit with death in his eyes and a USB drive in his pocket. "Gentlemen." He didn't sit. "I've been accused of weakness, of compromising our way of life for a woman." He placed the drive on the table. "So I brought evidence." Vittorio, loyal to the end, plugged it into the projector. The screen flickered to life with bank records, shipping manifests, photographs of Volkov meeting with the Calabrians, with the Russos, with federal agents whose faces had been run through facial recognition. Every conversation recorded. Every betrayal documented. "Sal Volkov has been working with the FBI for 8 months, Enzo said calmly, as chaos erupted around the table. "Planning to take down not just me, but all of you. The hit at the bus station? Federal agents were 3 blocks away, ready to swoop in after I was dead and arrest everyone connected to the ambush." He let that sink in. The weakness wasn't loving a woman. The weakness was trusting a rat. Volkov was already reaching for his gun when Marco, who'd been waiting outside, put a bullet through his skull. The body slumped forward onto the table. Enzo didn't even look at it. "Anyone else have concerns about my leadership?" The silence was absolute. "Good." He straightened his cuffs. "New rules. We evolve or we die. No more civilian casualties, no more unnecessary violence. We're businessmen, not barbarians. Anyone who disagrees can join Volkov." He walked out the same way he came in, alone, untouchable, a king who'd just reminded his subjects why they bent the knee. Nia watched from the North Tower balcony as Enzo's car pulled through the gates. It had been 3 days since the shootout, 3 days of doctors stitching his wounds while he conducted business from his bed. 3 days of her finally understanding that the monster and the boy were the same person. He'd just learned to wield his violence like a shield instead of a curse. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of this life. Not of the future growing inside her that she'd discovered that morning, staring at 2 pink lines in the bathroom of a mansion built on blood and power. He found her in the garden an hour later. The place where they'd first held hands as children in a photograph she'd thought was lost forever. Except it wasn't lost. Enzo had kept it, along with every drawing she'd ever given him, every memory of the girl who'd taught him that tenderness wasn't weakness. She wasn't wearing the uniform anymore. He'd burned it the night of the bus station, replaced her entire wardrobe with silk and cashmere, with dresses the color of sunsets and hope. Today she wore emerald green, and his eyes went dark with want when he saw her. "You're still here," he said, like he'd been afraid she'd vanish. "I'm still here." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "We both are." He went absolutely still. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once, his eyes widening, his hands spreading across her abdomen with something like reverence. "Nia, I know." She smiled, and it was real, whole, untainted by fear. "I know what this means, what we're bringing a child into, but I also know that you're the same boy who held my hand during thunderstorms and promised me forever." She touched his face, traced the scar on his cheek. "You kept your promise, Enzo. You came back for me." He dropped to his knees in the grass, pressed his forehead against her stomach, and she felt his shoulders shake with something that might have been tears or prayers or the release of 10 years of carrying darkness alone. "I'll protect you both," he whispered, "with everything I am, everything I have. You're my family now, my only family." She ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the sunset paint them both in rust and gold, the same colors as every beginning they'd ever had. "We always were," she said. And finally, after a decade of violence and longing and love that refused to die, Lorenzo Moretti came home. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this story. Every view, every comment, every moment you spend here keeps these stories alive. If you felt this one, make sure to subscribe and let me know you watched to the end.